today covers hardly about 20 verses of the 10th chapter. Most of the readers of the Gita miss many nuances of the words used, the combinations made, and it is only when one reads Sri Aurobindo's exposition that one realizes how much one is apt to miss in taking the text of the Gita very literally. Much is said, of course, but much more is unsaid. It is said between the lines. And when I was comparing the 8 or 10 verses that form the subject matter of today, I was surprised how he approaches, Sri Aurobindo approaches the supreme secret or the supreme word from so many angles, from so many levels, and his one concern is to give a total and an integral approach so that no aspect of God's creation is missed and no part of the human being is left uncultivated. He speaks of the Supreme Godhead having different voices. We are now familiar with this presentation that the Supreme Godhead is not only there on the transcendent levels, but he poises himself on different levels in different forms, grades of consciousness, concentrations of power. First he speaks of the Supreme Godhead as the imperishable self, what the Upanishads describe as the Atma, soul, impersonal, immutable, quiet, calm. But the Gita does not stop with that enunciation of itself. It calls upon man to awake to this presence and unify with it. Now, how am I to unify with the impersonal self? I am an active person involved in multifarious activities in the world, not all of which are of my voluntary choice. And how am I going to connect myself with the imperishable self? I am to connect myself in my inner impersonal being. If I hold back from the surface froth of my personality, which goes on acting and reacting, and hold back, gradually I become conscious of something impersonal. That's not this Atman, mind you, but it is a layer of my being which is not involved. I am not to mistake it for the self. But there is a level of my being which has a certain impersonality about it, which is not easily upset or disturbed. Now it is at that level that I have to unify myself with the impersonal self. That's one. Second, the Supreme Godhead is the Godhead in man. Man has to awake to it, that there is God within. Not the Atman, leave the Atman. Atman is different from God. In the sense, the Atman is fairly aloof. But our conception of God is that it is involved, taking cognizance of the movement, of the becoming, of nature. No, there is God in man. Man has to awake to it and become united with this hidden master of the being by going still deeper. It is more difficult than uniting with the impersonal self, to dig deeper and in the inmost self to identify, to link oneself, to awake and to be identified with the Godhead within. These are two steps which a seeker has to do. And once I become conscious, once I link myself to this Godhead within, I realize that this Godhead is also the Godhead in all beings. And this knowledge and perception and experience compels me to discover my spiritual unity with all creatures. And the test whether I have really realized my unity with the other creatures is that I feel each one as myself. There is no sense of separativity. The others are not others, but it is myself poised in other bodies. Now this realization is called realization of the universal self. Unity. Unity not at the mental level, with the conviction that all are one, not at the emotional level, radiating waves of goodwill, friendliness, love, but a total identification of myself in others. That is important. And next, this Godhead is the origin of all, and it has become all these existences through its power of nature. The one has become the multiple, the one and the many. But the one does not cease to be one by disporting itself as the many. By its own power, it spreads itself to perceive this one in all, to adore this one in all. Vasudevaha sarvam iti is to realize the consciousness of universality with the universe. We are speaking of different phases of realization with the divine reality, with the impersonal self, with the divinity within oneself, with the divine around in the world, and the divine not only being the origin, but also all existences in detail. Even what look to us to be perverse, to be deformed, are part of the process. Simply because a person or a situation is full of evil, it does not mean that it is divorced from God. God is there even behind the darkness. If only we have the eye to probe and the patience to bear. This is a very essential point in Sri Aurobindo's approach, that what we call good and bad, evil and the right, these are not permanently fixed realities. They are changing. Each one serves the cosmic purpose by its goodness, by its badness. And it is only when we transcend these dualities that we begin to see the necessity, the indispensability of these different values for the emerging perfection. And to realize the divine self in the universe is not a passionless, a relationless identity. In the Upanishads we always hear avyavaharya. It cannot be related to. We have only to experience it. There is no relationship possible. But Sri Aurobindo says, that's not the identity. That is what the Gita calls for. It is a larger and a richer oneness which fulfills the cosmic purpose, not ignores, not skirts the divine intention. It takes up the various human relations, father, mother, friend, lover, many kinds. And he says, each relationship properly cultivated should lead to its fulfillment in God. Each relationship is a step, if we cultivate it properly, to an eventual relationship at the level of God. And an integral seeker is to awake to this many-sided revelation of God in all ways, at different levels. You have to perceive, you have to see the presence of divinity in every kind of relation. It may be deformed, it may be perverted, but at the core, at the essential level, there is what Yajnavalkya speaks to his celebrated wife, that nobody, one does not love the husband for sake of husband or wife for sake of wife, but because of the self. The self in me looks to the self in you, and there is a leap. Myself may not feel the same way to a self in another person, but there is an instinctive leap. with another self in another body. That is because this self recognizes itself in another form on the same wavelength. The wavelengths may differ. So it is not for the sake of the external form, external beauty, that there is this attraction. Real attraction, at the bottom of the attraction, unless it is a patently, vitally based attraction, physically based attraction, there is some core of divinity bringing two together. If you look at things from that angle, every experience changes its character. And this is the Supreme Word. To adore Him as the supreme and divine origin of all. Not only the origin of all, but also the Lord of the world. The world is not something that He creates and leaves it, but it is a becoming. There is a being and its becoming. So the being is involved in the becoming at every step. That is why Sri Aurobindo hesitates to use the word creation. Creation means the creator, the act of creation, and the created. All these three are different entities. But when he speaks as being and becoming, the being itself changes, parinam, into a state of becoming. This is to be kept in mind. The world is his becoming. Unified knowledge and devotion, love, is the supreme yoga to which the Gita has brought us at this moment. And once this identity is forged, how do we act? How do we behave? On what basis do we act? This is bhakti, founded upon and opening to knowledge, is the motive power of works. It involves acceptance by the mind and heart of the devotee. That is not bhakti alone, but an enlightened bhakti. Not knowledge alone, not dry metaphysical knowledge alone, but knowledge as a result of love. Knowledge is a culmination of love. These two constitute the supreme yoga. And what is bhakti? What is devotion? We are all familiar with the Gita's classification of the four types of bhakti we have discussed earlier. But at this point, it says, delight of the heart in God is true bhakti. The heart joys in the concept of God, in the idea of God. It has its own delight. And that is true bhakti, true devotion. There is no reason. There is no expectation. It goes on take ebullition of delight. And the Lord says, He speaks to Arjuna these secrets because he has it. At the moment when he is engaged in this conversation, Arjuna, as a result of all that he has said, is filled with delight in the heart and has acquired the competence to receive the supreme word. And that knowledge which is based on devotion, is something that bridges the cosmic process in time and the supracosmic eternity. In the Vedanta, for instance, there is an unbridgeable gulf between that eternity, the infinity, and this changing complex in the space and time. It is only by withdrawing from it, turning our back from it, this moment, that you begin to sense this, the eternal and the infinite. But the kind of knowledge that the Gita advocates is one that bridges this gulf, relates the cosmic process in time with the supracosmic eternity. And speaking of the eternal, he makes it clear that this eternal has no origin. Origin of the kind we conceive. The divine is unborn. It is the origin of this universe. It becomes the universe, but it remains unstained. It remains what it is. And this knowledge, when we realize it, liberates us from our ignorance. Incidentally, he refers to the philosophy of pantheism. Pantheism of Western philosophy, which says that all nature is God. Everything is God, the plants are God, the animals, the birds, all is God. That is called pantheism. But pantheism limits God to this. God is something more also. God is not exhausted by what He has created. Nature does not exhaust God. God creates and He exceeds the creation. And Srila observes that it is because He transcends, He stands above, that He can truly create. So pantheism is true enough as far as it goes, but it limits our conception and our experience. And this transcendence of the divine, he repeats, is not a negation of what exists here. It does not absolve itself from all relations with this world. All cosmic relations derive from it. Ultimately, all relations here are derived from that. The cause of all is there. There is no separate entity like a devil or a dark being causing things in our universe. What has caused there may be perverted, may be interfered with, may be deformed, but everything has a cause there. And how does what is eternal, what is infinite, throw itself in the realms of time, in the extension of space? He speaks, Lord Krishna speaks of the 7 rishis. They are all his instruments. 7 rishis, Sapta rishis, they are mentioned in the Veda and of course in the Puranas, and they are the intelligence powers of the divine wisdom. There is that intelligence, there is the divine, the prajna, and it diversifies itself. There are 7 planes of existence based upon 7 principles of truth, and on each level there is one power totaling to 7 and they are the 7 rishis. You can say that they are the powers of divine wisdom on each level of existence. And then he speaks of the 4 manus. Manus are mental beings, creators of a mental order, and they are responsible for this 4-fold order of the human society. 4-fold order of the human society is also reflected in the 4-fold stream of the human consciousness: knowledge, power, organization and harmony, and labor, work or service. So when you consider from a social angle, you think there are so many categories of human effort. We may call them castes here in India, they may call them classes in the West, but they are certain classifications according to nature. And Sri Aurobindo points out that corresponding to this 4-fold division, or not exactly division, but classification of the human in collectivity, in each individual also, all these 4 principles are embedded. They are the 4 manus, the mental beings, who are the creators of this 4-fold life in active nature. Lord Krishna refers to these Saptarishis and 4 manus who are responsible for the developing organizational system in human collectivity, in nature. And these originators of the 4-fold order, of the 7-fold manifestation, their origin is above, is in the transcendent, absolute. But the absolute is not a composite, a total of the many, but an originating absolute. Any number of formations, any number of becomings brought in together, totaled up together, do not exhaust or do not make up the absolute. The absolute is still beyond. Is consolidated in another form to that extent, deprives the original store of that quantity of energy. But in the divine logic, it remains the same. There's the famous verse in the Isha Upanishad, Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamyeva Avashishyate. Take out the full from the full remains. This is contrary to human logic, but as Sri Aurobindo says, it is the magic of the infinite. And the power that develops all this is the power of God, Atma Shakti. It is not an alien power which somehow comes into being and foists all creation on the white and pure bosom of God, of Brahma. It is the Atma Shakti, Devatma Shakti, which is the selfless power. And it is because of this Atma Shakti that all objects, our objective existence, has a spiritual origin. Even what we call lower nature is not different essentially from the power Atma Shakti. It is a subordinate development, always a secondary movement. It is an expressive figure of the Godhead, though disfigured by the cosmic ignorance. But it is the figure of the Godhead, however deformed, however disfigured. That is why the Gita constantly speaks of Bhutan. Bhuta does not mean spirits or ghosts. From the root Bhu, Bhava and Bhutan, the becomings. All creatures, all are the becomings of God. And the becoming is not the opposite of being. Becoming is a development of being. Always keeping the relation with the parental being, not something contradictory, not something opposite. And in all this, we have to keep in mind the down look of the transcendent. The transcendent is beyond and above, but it has not turned its eye or back on this creation, which is its own emanation. So he says, the down look of the transcendent is one. That is, the transcendent relates itself at every moment with what has issued from it, what it has issued out of it. And side by side, close, immanent presence of the divine government of the universe. Immanent, indwelling in everything. There is God above, no doubt. But in everything, in every existence, in every form, there is an immanent presence. And this immanent presence, again, is not something that is passive. It is not something that just witnesses and allows the surface being to do whatever silly things it wants to do. But from its level, it governs. That is what Sri Aurobindo says, there is a divine government of the universe from the immanent reality. It is not there without a purpose. It is not there as something imprisoned in form. There is a purpose, there is a truth in its being inherent in every form. And that is, it governs from that. Maybe it takes several steps. There is no direct governance in our state of ignorance and falsehood. But when you trace it to the origin, the impulse, the governance is from the divine, immanent reality. In other words, he is not aloof. He governs from within and above. This effective knowledge, mind you, not just philosophical understanding, not a logical conception, but a knowledge that is effective and dynamic. It changes the character. It changes the structure of life. Such an effective knowledge alone can free us from bewilderment in this universe, in this world of ignorance. Wisdom, knowledge is not an unrelated impersonality. We are apt to think that jnana gives a certain unrelatedness. That's only the first step. A larger knowledge embraces, comprehends that of which it is the knowledge. So it is not unrelated to impersonality. The seeker is aware of transcendence, immanence, and even when one realizes the universality of the spirit, there is always a consciousness relating to the transcendent. Even when one is individually in touch with in link with the divinity within, there is always the universal dimension. So this individual, universal and transcendent, these are three interrelated dimensions from which we can't run away, whatever our philosophy. And when you have this knowledge embedded in ourselves, it turns into love and adoration of the Supreme. To this end, the argument in the first 20 verses of the 10th chapter lead us to giving us an integral perspective that everything is related to everything else. Nothing is truly compartmentalized. If our mind, our mental logic fails to connect things, we appreciate this inherent unity. It is the fault of our mental equipment. It doesn't make any distinct difference to the reality, to the comprehending reality, which is transcendent, immanent, individual, universally immanent and individual. We'll take up the next step, the next block of verses, which deals with vibhutis, concentration to the divine power. We have spoken of the 7 rishis, the 4 manus, and now he is going to speak of the vibhutis, the concentrations of consciousness power in certain personalities, in certain forms, all of which may not strike us as spiritual, but they are emanations with a purpose. They are the vibhutis, which interesting subject. By the way, next Sunday we are not going to meet because I have to preside over Sri Kapali Shastri's endowment lectures at the university on the 2nd and 3rd. So we will be meeting on Sunday thereafter. I think it will be the 10th.